Welcome, Darksiders. Welcome all those folks that are new to the channel. My name is Al, and today we are talking about Watchmen, and man, is there a lot to get into with this episode. I feel like they answered a lot of questions that we had kind of open with the last 3 episodes, so that was cool, and there are tons of Easter eggs in here, and I got a million theories, right? So be careful to listen to what I share because I want to know what you think about it. So the first thing is this, like the egg reference is on in this episode as well. We see in the opening sequence, she's selling eggs, she breaks eggs. So that whole idea of eggs has been like a running theme in the show. But what I think is cool about this episode, especially with the breaking of the eggs, is it represents really with a lot of the different characters, especially Angela's characters, things that were contained are not so much contained anymore. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But what I thought was really cool about that opening sequence was what happened with the couple at the farm. You guys know that they're laying there in the bed. There's a knock on the door. It's Lady True. Lady True wants to buy their farm, but not just the farm. She also wants to buy the acreage as well. And she brings up the past and says, listen, you guys were trying to have a kid. You could not have a kid. So she essentially, it looks like, has cloned that kid and wants to offer that to them as kind of payment for their farm. The two go back and forth about it, but then they finally accept the payment. And then we see that they walk out the house. There's a rumbling. They walk out the house. They see something streak across the sky and crashes on their land. And that's really the reason, right, why she wanted the land. I'm sure she knew that that was coming, and now she owns whatever's landed on that property. What I thought was really interesting about this, and I want to know if you caught this, so let me know if you did, that was very much a Superman reference. Did you notice that the husband's name was Jonathan? Very reflective of Superman's parents who tried to have kids, but Martha couldn't until Clark came along. So that whole idea, I feel like that was a nod at the Superman theme of his parents with the farm, with parents not able to have kids. You have this crashing object on the farm, i.e. it happened with Superman and Clark was there. She gives the baby to the couple, Lady True, and we have the crashing object in the show. So I thought that was a pretty cool nod to the whole idea of Superman. So that's one of the things I love about Watchmen. Like, the writing in this is very tight. I feel like it's very, very smart, and I feel like it's very, very cohesive. So that's the first thing that I noticed, and I thought that was an amazing thing to do. So then we jump to Angela, and we know that she's still kind of trying to get things straight with what's going on with her father. She's breaking up the wheelchair, trying to get rid of the evidence now that she knows that Lori knows that there was a wheelchair at the crime scene. So Angela's kind of trying to separate herself from all of that. Then she gets a call from the museum, and then she goes to check it out, and she finds out some more information about her father and how she's tied in to the first family that we saw at the very first episode of Watchmen. And then we cut to Angela going to visit Glass in what appears to be some underground bunker. Now, this is a really fascinating scene because we find out a little bit more about him and how really he is obsessed with the goings on in Oklahoma. We see that he's tracking what's going on with the falling squid, and he's taking some pictures. So he's kind of trying to figure out what's going on there. And he hypothesizes that these squid are coming from a different dimension. So now we've learned where the squid are coming from when we see them fall in the episode. But what I think is really interesting about that is the idea or the notion now of multiple dimensions really solidified in the show. And that's important for something that I noticed later on. So the two of them are having some discussion about what's going on. Angela says, hey, listen, something was up with the chief. She shows Glass the hood and the robe, and he's intrigued. So now apparently they're going to take a look at what's going on with that, and they're going to use a lab of his ex-wife, we don't know who that is, also to examine the pills that Will has. So it's interesting, right, because we find out more about Glass outside of just his work as a detective, and we see that there's a lot going on with him. We always found him a little bit of an odd character, but now we really find him much more so. So that partnership, I think, is interesting as well, as Angela has really kind of gone under the radar to do her own investigation outside of the department, and it looks like Glass is going to be partnering with her to do that. So from there we jump to Angela, who is in her full costume, and she's carrying a black bag with the chopped up wheelchair, and she throws that off of a bridge into some kind of moving train. And then it's really fascinating, right, because she looks and notices that there's someone behind her that's watching her. So who knows what this scene is really referencing? A lot of people have said it could be just a reference to kind of who's watching the Watchmen, which is the theme of the comic book. But what I think is interesting here is how she gives chase and how this guy gets away. I guess he's like the lube guy, which is like crazy because he puts the stuff on his body and literally slides into the sewer. You don't see that every day. But my whole theory about this is that really there are vigilantes that are kind of watching not only Angela, but everybody going on. So I'm thinking that there are a number of vigilantes this silver guy maybe being one of them that's really kind of hiding in the shadow out of harm's way, because we know that vigilantism is a crime. But I wouldn't be surprised if in later episodes we start to see more of them pop up and really kind of show as a force against what's going on with what they're seeing happen with the police and all that good stuff. So that's my theory for that. Let me know what you think about that. All right, Darksiders. So now we're at the scene where Angela's at the police station. She's gotten the evidence from Slither Boy and she's getting off the elevator. Now, remember the reference I gave to the broken eggs, and the broken eggs kind of being symbolism for more and more things being revealed, how things are becoming more and more uncontained. And we kind of saw that motif or that symbolism throughout the episodes prior to episode 4, but not to the same extent. In this episode, we see like the full carton of eggs being broke. Now, here's an example of what I mean. You notice how the senator actually calls Angela by name. She knows who Angela is. And we've seen kind of Angela's identity being slowly kind of revealed to folks that are not supposed to know who she is, really almost from the beginning with Will, who knew who she was. So I feel like, again, that's another reference to the eggs and how we start to see more eggs being broke and how more things are starting to become unraveled in the show. More things are starting to be revealed. So I just wanted to throw that in there. After having that conversation with the senator, Angela finds out that Lori is now the head of the department, and she goes to have a conversation with her. Now, during their conversation, Angela finds out that Lori has actually found out some information about who may have stolen her car, and she finds that they found some prints, which are her father's prints, and Lori has this whole conversation about it being really bizarre, but it does tie in quite nicely to the wheelchair. Well, while they're having a conversation about that, some more information comes in, which leads them to take a trip to see Lady True. Now, during that trip, they have a conversation with each other, and Lori actually reveals more about her history, which is a cool little nod to the comic book. Now, before we go on, actually, I want to jump back to the farm where we see that object crash. Now, what I think is fascinating here, and this is another theory that I have, it'd be interesting to see what or who is in that object, because one of the things that we've seen in the Watchmen universe is that no one really has superpowers outside of Dr. Manhattan, but potentially we could get some folks in the Watchmen series with superpowers now, because we definitely have the existence of multiple universes, and it could be conceivable that we have a being that comes from those universes that actually visits our universe that does have superpowers. And I wonder if that is a way for the show to kind of introduce that whole idea, which I think is really interesting, and it'd be interesting to see how diehard fans feel about that. How do you feel about that if you're a diehard fan of really introducing beings with actual superpowers into the narrative? My guess is that this might be happening, being as though that's not something centralized to the Watchmen source material outside of course, Dr. Manhattan. All right, Darksiders, so let's go back and talk about the conversation with Lady True, Angela, and Lori, because I think this is super important for a lot of different reasons. Number one, we find out now how Will's car probably was picked up and flown away. It's likely it was the device that they found in the hangar. But I think what's more important here is the conversation that is had between Lady True and Angela. But it's also important to note that we do find out a little bit more about the Millennium Clock, and that we know it's really important, and the structure that they're in as well is really important, though we don't find a whole bunch of information about that. But with this whole scene, really I think the focus is on the conversation had between Lady True and Angela when they're speaking to each other in Vietnamese. It's really that acknowledgement that Lady True has given Angela, that I know who your father is and we are connected. And Angela knows that Lady True is a very important and influential person. So the fact that those two have conversed in that matter, and Angela knows now that Dad is connected to Lady True, I think really just intensifies the story and gives us great setup for the next 4 episodes to come. Now let's jump to the scene where we see Andrien, who it looks like he's fishing in some kind of pond at night. Then we find out that he's actually pulling clones out of the water. So apparently that pond is full of clones, and now we get some idea of where his servants come from. But we do know in this case that he's not actually claiming creation of them, which I think is fascinating. So we cut back to his home and we see that essentially he's had a bad night. And as I've said before in other episodes, I think that he is really kind of off his rocker. Now, some people have said to me that, Al, he's probably not crazy. Let me know what you think about this. But he sees the clones as objects of function. That is to say that they serve a certain purpose, and he has not really humanized them or connected with them on any kind of emotional level. So it's easy for him to get rid of them, just like you and I would discard a piece of balled up paper. I also find it fascinating when we see Andrien kind of launching those clones into the atmosphere. So here's something that I think is really interesting. Now, when we think back to the last episode where we saw him launch a clone, that clone fell back to Earth and it was frozen, the notion here for me was that he was launching a clone and the clone actually was hitting the atmosphere and then falling back to Earth and he was frozen. Now, when we see the new clones get launched, isn't it fascinating how when we see them launch, we see them kind of disappear into what looks to be just nothingness. We see them and then they just disappear. Here's my theory. My theory is that Andrien is actually in a different dimension. That's what I think. I don't think that he is on the moon, as some have theorized in some of the other videos I've seen, but I think that he is actually in a different dimension. I think that he knows it. I think that there is some kind of deal made between he and Lady True put him there, and he's now trying to escape. And I think that when we see the launching of the new clones, it's a representation of him finding the way out. So when we see those clones being launched into the air and then they just kind of disappear, I think that he is happy because he has finally found the point at which he can leave his prison, at which he can leave the dimension that he's in. That's a theory that I have. Please share what you think about that. Also really interesting that in the scene between Lady True and Will can walk. Now, I think that most people are thinking what this means is that Will really kind of was fabricating the whole idea that he couldn't walk in the wheelchair. I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. I'm not really sure exactly now what's going on with Will. I'm not even sure that that is the original Will and not some type of clone, or he has done something or taken something that gives him the capacity to walk. And when he met Angela, he really could not walk. Maybe the pills are part of that. Maybe the pills are part of what gives him the ability to do certain things. We did hear him say that the pills are also what helps him remember. So I guess we'll find that out later on when Glass is examining what those pills are actually for. So I feel like this episode opened up a whole bunch of stuff for us to talk about. And one thing that's really cool about Watchmen is how the story builds and how, despite the fact that they don't tell the story in a linear motion, which I know for some of you guys is confusing, and you shared that in the comments, and I've told you that you have to watch it more than once and it'll click for you, and then that's when the show gets really good. I think that this show is so well executed, and it's so much for us to examine, so much for us to see and to theorize about, and we can't really know what's going on, but we can really formulate some good theories based on how the show is written, and I think that that's done on purpose. So I'm really looking forward to episode 5 of Watchmen and to see what they do with these next couple of episodes, because as we know so far, we don't know that there's going to be a season 2. I heard an interview about that. I shared it on another video where the director was saying they don't know at this point. Maybe they do know, but from what I know, and unless you know something different, please let me know in the comments. We don't know that there's going to be a season 2, so they've really kind of thrown their hearts into this first season of Watchmen, and it's been phenomenal. Make sure that you check out our last review of Watchmen. It'll be popping up on the screen right here, and also make sure that you check out our latest review of The Mandalorian, which was fantastic. All right, you guys, we are here every Wednesday talking about Watchmen. If you are not joining the live streams on Sunday, you don't know what you're missing. Every Sunday we go live with myself and the rest of the Darksiders on 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure that you join us there because we have an amazing time. All right, you guys, I will see you on the next video. I'll meet you right there. Peace.